Hello and welcome everyone, it's finally time. After months of wait, we finally arrived at the release of Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. I'm Derivative, your host, Goji fan, and residential hype man. You know what you're here for, you know what you clicked on. We are doing a review today. Because honestly, we've had an amazing few months for Godzilla. What, between -1, an Oscar win, and hey, now this movie. So naturally, everyone's wondering, can Godzilla x Kong continue the momentum, and did it stick the landing? Well, let's find out, but first things first. Number 1, I recommend putting on a pair of headphones and just cozying up. Maybe clean out your house or go for a walk, because this review will mostly be audio first, essentially playing like an audiobook more so than a shot-for-shot video. Number 2, this will be a spoiler review. I will be going over crucial plot details, so if you don't want the movie spoiled for yourself, turn back now and tune back in later after you've hit up your local theater. And number 3, just a little bit about myself so you know what kind of review to expect. I've basically seen a lot of Godzilla movies, like a lot, and I've been watching them for many years. That said, yes, I have seen all of the legendary things obviously, but I didn't grow up with legendary, so my perception will be informed by my prior Goji experience leading up to this. So without further ado, let's get into it. So throughout the movie, you basically have 3 interwoven plots, and I think each one in its own way highlights the good and bad about the movie. And I think we can see that if we start with Kong. And I think it's established pretty early at the outset that, quite similarly to Godzilla vs. Kong, this will once again be a Kong-centered movie. So if you enjoyed that formula from last time, then I have good news, they don't change it here. But they do change some things up a bit, because since Kong spends a lot of time away from other humans, his emotional moments come from interacting with other titans instead, like Kong, Zuko, Scar King, the other apes. And I'll admit, there were a couple other chuckle-worthy moments when he first encounters Godzilla. But otherwise, his plot is pretty straightforward. He explores Hollow Earth, he finds others of his kind, he fights Scar King, he gets served by Shimo, he needs to enlist Godzilla's help, the rest is history. Now, circling over to the second main plot thread, you have the humans. And there you basically have 4 main humans, several side characters before main ones. You've got Eileen and Gia basically reprising their previous roles, you've got Bernie being, well, podcaster Bernie, and eventually joining the crew, and you've got Trapper, the new, quippy, hippie Titan veterinarian. And he's fun to have around. But since you're here to watch a MonsterVerse movie, I think it comes as no surprise that the humans really serve to just move the plot along, because it's pretty quick to summarize. Gia discovers she's receiving a telepathic SOS which matches the Hollow Earth signal, and then Eileen enlists Bernie's help to try to decipher the signal, and that eventually leads to them plus Trapper going to Hollow Earth to eventually become part of the whole big world-saving plot, which eventually involves them plus the Iwi tribe fulfilling some world-saving prophecy. Oh yeah, and Mothra's part of that, and Gia becomes narratively tied to Mothra because of her connection. But sadly, don't hold out a lot of hope there, because it is nice to have Mothra and nice to have her, well, not die by the end, but this version of Mothra is sadly just a plot device. But that's the human plot in a nutshell, and in a way it's a bit of a fetch quest involving them needing to do certain things to be in certain places to eventually get Kong and Godzilla together to have their big fight. And granted, anyone who's seen the movie knows that's a gross oversimplification, but the movie doesn't really spend too much time focusing on the humans or really pretending the humans play more of a role than they really do. And while Gia gets some emotional moments, and even Eileen and Gia have a couple emotional moments together, they never really pretend the humans are the emotional center of the movie. And surprisingly, even Gia and Kong don't really have that many emotional moments together like they did in the previous movie. And I think that's a shame, but that's kind of how the plot shaped out this time. But I digress, make no mistake, this is a Kong movie. But hey, I do have good news in that regard, because it feels like every actor in the room understood the assignment, and in a good way. Because even though the human characters aren't meant to stand out, they really do give good performances when it comes to, well, playing the characters they're supposed to. Between Gia coming into her own, Eileen watching her grow up a little bit, and even Trapper and Bernie getting a chance to bounce off each other a bit. And they try to get some chuckles, and it works. I mean, it didn't work for me because I'm just a weird moviegoer, but I can say Bernie and Trapper definitely got some laughs out of people in the theater. So yes, the people are glorified plot devices to absolutely no one's surprise in this movie. Which brings us to... Godzilla. And okay, like, he does have some really cool moments and a cute one, I think, but make no mistake, this is once again a Kong movie. So while the main plot's taking place, Godzilla doesn't really get a lot of screen time until the very end when Kong needs him for the big team up against Scar King, his army of apes, and Shimo. So what does Godzilla have to do during the runtime? He basically goes on an RPG level grind. First he hits up Rome to kill Skyla in order to basically give himself a house. He uses the Colosseum for naps, and I thought that was adorable. If I fits, I sits. Then he hits up some other locations, but the next major one is France, and he just straight up destroys a fully functioning nuclear power plant to absorb its energy. Loss of life, no problem. He just sucks up the energy and leaves, and he does that to ultimately go to Antarctica and face Tiamat to kill Tiamat and then take her lair to absorb the energy to get his final glow up and makeover. And that's basically it until Kong comes to the surface. They have their fight in Egypt and then the final team up. Again, I'm going over the movie in broad strokes, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And if it sounds like Godzilla doesn't have a lot of screen time, that's because he doesn't. At least not until the movie needs him in the very end. And Godzilla definitely has some standout moments when he's on screen. He straight up decimates Skyla and Tiamat, it's not even close. And then when he fights Kong, he just suplexes him. Kong tries dragging Godzilla by the tail at one point, but he's not having it. And of course, my favorite Godzilla moment is really just him taking a nap in the Coliseum. I think it's cute. But yes, ultimately, I felt Godzilla's moments were way too short. But one good thing I will say about this movie is that they firmly stated where Godzilla stands in the movie. Because whenever he was on screen, make no mistake, he was king. No questions asked, he's just king of the monsters. I just wish there were more screen time of him, but maybe that's just my Goji bias. And lastly, as you expect, the plot points come to a head. There's the Godzilla and Kong rematch, Gia summons Mothra, Mothra flies up to Egypt to calm down Godzilla, and they have their last glorious final battle team up. They battle Scar King and Shimo, but it turns out that Scar King has been controlling Shimo with this crystal the entire time. So by the time they get to Brazil, they basically break the crystal at the end of Scar King's whip. And then they have a Mortal Kombat moment. Shimo freezes Scar King and Kong breaks him into a million pieces, taking the dub away from Godzilla once again. And just like that, the movie basically wraps up. Godzilla goes back to his new house in Rome for a nap, and the humans, you know, they go off doing human stuff, I guess. And Kong, well, let's see, he has a new family, he's king, and now he's got Shimo as a working partner? Man, this guy really got it good in this movie. Roll credits, and that's the end. And that's pretty much it as far as the main plot, so how did it stack up? So let's go ahead and start with the positives. First off were the surprises, and I'll admit that despite the spoilers, trailers, and leaks, I found a lot of genuinely nice surprises. For instance, little details like the movie unexpectedly opens up right away with Kong being chased by wart dogs. Or of course there's Godzilla getting a bed. But following up on surprises is what I think is the movie's second standout point, and that's its willingness to explore new ideas. For instance, the movie starts out with Kong just doing a straight up Mortal Kombat on one of the wart dogs. He just rips it in half. And later we see that Scar King has decapitated several apes and placed their heads on his skewer. Probably to serve as a warning to other apes, obviously. So the movie was like really willing to explore gore in some places, and I felt things like that were like the standout new ideas. And occasionally you get some little things, like Godzilla sprinting while he's doing his atomic breath, just to show you how OP he is by the end of the movie. And I think the last positive thing worth noting is that this movie was not afraid to get silly. Obviously, I'm not referring to the human moments, but the monster moments. Like after Kong rips the wart dog in half, he's thinking, oh god, that was disgusting, I need a shower. Or like Godzilla just straight up suplexing Kong. Oh yeah, and they finally have an anti-gravity fight, and I feel like people were asking for that from the last movie, so hey, that's neat. So now let's get to the cons. Now, for better or worse, this movie is fast-paced. In some ways, that wasn't actually bad because they didn't spend a lot of time on plot points that just needed to move along. The movie doesn't pretend to be more or less than it is and fits in a 2-hour time frame. But ironically, one place where the pacing did actually bother me was with the fights. I'm not even talking about Godzilla's screen time at that point, just the fights generally. Like Godzilla vs. Skyla, Godzilla vs. Tiamat, and the Godzilla vs. Kong rematch, like all of those were pretty short. And actually, one thing I didn't like is that they cut away from the fights sometimes. Like Tiamat just casually dies underwater and they don't really show it. Or Kong has a fight with a new eel species in Hollow Earth, and he's struggling for a bit, but how does he win? Oh. Because soon after they just cut away from the action and just show you the end of the fight. But given the 2-hour length, there wasn't too much they could really cut away in order to replace that with fight stuff. Maybe they could have removed the minor subplot involving Kong's tooth, because it felt like they spent way more time on Kong's tooth for some reason than they really needed to. That's one thing I would cut. And the second con is of course the plot contrivances. Now thankfully this movie doesn't pretend to be more than it is, which is good, but I'll just say it's best not to ask questions because the more questions you ask, the more frustrated you'll get with this movie. For instance, how does Godzilla translate a general SOS into needing to do a level grind throughout the movie? And if Geo wasn't able to convince her mom to take her to Hollow Earth, this movie would basically be over. And why is a crystal causing Shimo enough pain to subject herself to Scar King's control? They never really explain that. So yeah, when you watch the movie, it's best not to think about that stuff. And for the third con, we get to Godzilla. Now, when Godzilla's on screen, he definitely gets standout moments, everything from murking other titans to getting a bed, and of course the suplex. And when he's on screen, the movie definitely reminds you that he's still the king, no questions asked. Which is why I'm genuinely sad that he didn't get enough screen time. And I'm genuinely concerned about this, because it feels like they don't really know how to write Godzilla as a character, and that he might just devolve into a glorified, underwritten set piece for the movies. Which is actually a shame, because this is a really unique version of Godzilla that we have. But I digress, because there's probably a story for another time, but in short, Godzilla definitely needed more screen time. Next is less about the movie, is something more to do with the marketing around the movie. Because not only did I feel the trailer spoiled too much, but the marketing felt too excessive, at least in my opinion. Because there's a final trailer, for instance, that said something like, we've had 10 years of MonsterVerse and it's all led to this, and it's very grand and epic. No, it wasn't, and that's fine, but the marketing really oversold and overhyped this movie. They could have saved some money by just not doing as much. I don't think it would have changed reviews, I don't think it would have changed ticket sales. They literally would have just saved money by by doing less marketing. What a concept. Anyway, let's get to the last but not least, and honestly, this movie felt like a filler movie. Like, yes, it has a definitive ending. We see Kong get his kingdom, Godzilla taking a nap, the humans going back to business as usual, yada yada, but the way it ended, it just felt like world building and setup. And honestly, Scar King was overhyped. He did not feel like a final boss. He just felt like a side quest and a main quest. For what exactly? I don't know, but I think it's fair to compare against Godzilla vs. Kong, which is under the same director, and that ending just felt more complete and more definitive. I don't know, I can't put my finger on that one, but that's just how I felt. Oh, and if you're wondering why I didn't mention Mothra much, it's because she's not really a huge part of this movie. She's basically a plot device. I feel badly, but hey, at least Mothra doesn't die this time. So alright, let's just wrap this up with a final score, and that's going to be a 6.5 out of 10. That may change over time. I am gonna be honest, that does feel optimistic, but hey, since this is a day one review, I'm gonna be nice to the movie. I'm just gonna leave it there. And with that, we are wrapping up this review. So what did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Leave a like, a share, or subscribe. Why are you still here? And I'll catch you later. Peace.